morning. Good morning. It's Sunday morning. Got a cup of coffee. Nice fire. You know what we just had on this fire? We had Spam. That's right. Survival pig Spam on a Sunday morning. I cooked up the Spam. I got King's Hawaiian sweetbread. People running around on a Sunday morning, but me, I'm cooking up Spam, King's Hawaiian sweetbread, fried eggs. We're going to have fried egg and Spam sliders right after the show this morning. It's going to be a good morning. So, we're going to look back on this week, see what's going on. COVID, this, pandemic, that, blah, blah, blah. I got friends in the house. They're coming to join us. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday morning. As always, let's begin with a prayer. E ko mako e maku e loko kalani na mahalo pia naku e. Mahalo nui naku e. Mai kaunalipo. Mai kaunalipo. Mai kahikina, mai kaulana, e hele mai oe atu e hele mai e ku, a hina, a tangaroa, a tāne, e hele mai e kanaha, e kanawai, e hele mai oe e au makua. Mahalo ke akua, as above, so below. May it be on earth as it is in heaven. Please, give us this day and forgive us. Please, help us to forgive. Please, no temptation and no evil. Mahalo ke akua. May we be a blessing to each other. Mahalo ke akua. May you be a blessing to us all.
Of the raping of the land, of prejudice and superstition, such things have no place in Bali. I have listened to my heart, and it speaks to me of danger, of danger. I have watched the tides of change in a homeland overrun with strangers of the people.
Hey, good morning, and welcome to Hindsite 2020. You know, it's always easier to look back on something, you know. That's why I guess we think traditional knowledge is important. So, some of us like to advocate always being advised by tradition. But as always, you know, I'd like to advise, as my grandfather did, that the past should always have a voice, but it should never have a vote. It should always inform you. It should never control you. So even as a traditionalist, I look forward and back and forward and back. It's sort of like looking left and right when you cross the street. You ought to look left again before you cross. Anyway, you can look left or you can look right. But either way, we got to look ahead. And joining me today, as always, is the best bunch of fellas you would ever see on a Sunday morning. Thank you, fellas, for joining me here. And welcome Sunday morning, everybody. Polly, good to see you. And what a pleasure. Jimmy Love and Ramsey.
Morning, fellas.
We've been waiting for a while to get you on the Sunday chat, and here we are, my favorite group of fellas this morning. Good to see you. How are you, Polly? Start us around the circle.
That's that beautiful sunrise in Haula you see reflecting off my face.
Ooh.
All good.
Ooh, nice, nice. Haula, as some of our viewers may know, is that fabulous community up on the east shore of Oahu, constantly winning national awards for preparedness and community capacity building. And we're all about that, supporting the rural communities that are, in fact, the lifeblood to the metropolitan areas during disasters and during recovery. So, Jimmy Love, what's happening down there in Haina?
Well, we're just waking up and enjoying this beautiful morning. No matter where you are, look for the beauty.
I'm with you. And by the way, I want to commend you guys on this Ben Franklin approach to life, the early to bed, early to rise. They say he was talking about his proclivity with the French women in that early to rise statement. But I don't know. It's Ben Franklin. Brother Ramsey, Sunday morning. I've been waiting for this one.
Yeah, with an emphasis on the sun.
Right? Yeah. I'm with you. I see beautiful sunrise.
Yeah.
Where is that? That beach looks oddly familiar.
Yes, well, this is Waimanalo.
Yes, I thought
where
so.
I am today. I am in the Ahupua of Waimanalo.
Beautiful.
More like the Okole side of Waimanalo, Hawaii Kai side. Yeah. So I got to remind everybody to live over here by the Costco,
Yeah. It's funny that place, Kuli'o'o, the whole area, the backside, so famous for the food production in the old days. And in fact, as recently as the 70s, we still had the pig farms and everything out there doing Kalama Valley and the protests. But, it's like O'Okala. They say kuli o'o. Hey, that what? You can hear the o'o.
Yeah.
So they're talking about the farmers in the morning, right? Digging with the o'o. And they're talking about here, O'Okala. Right, when you're coming up past the gulches north of Hilo, where we live in Hamakua, Jimmy and me, and that o'o in the sun, O'Okala. Again, they're talking about the farmers. I find that interesting and intriguing about the Hawaiian culture. They call the helmet of the soldier, the mahi ole. The mahi ole, it means not a farmer.
Yeah.
So they don't call a soldier in Hawaiian soldier. They call him not a farmer. That means, from a behavioral aspect, the guys creating the language or the people in charge are sitting there going, farmer, farmer, farmer. Oh, not a farmer. Farmer, not a farmer. Farmer, farmer, farmer. Right? So, in other words, what they value is someone who can produce food. Someone who lives in communication with the land. They do not value the mook with the spear poking things. They call him not a farmer.
Yeah. Yeah, we're contemplating that recently. The whole idea that actually when you flip it around, it's producer, 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 taker, taker, producer.
Yeah, exactly. Right? There are other ways to define those terms, right? Exactly, right?
And what's interesting, because more people want to be mahi ole today than mahi.
Aye.
Right? I mean, it seems like everybody wants to be mahi ole.
Yes.
Which means most people are not producers.
Right.
From that standpoint.
And they want, like we see on the T-shirts, the calendars, the poster, mana, right? This whole power. They got these biceps tattooed. Mana as power was in reference to mana'o, to the Mino Pico. To the idea of mana'o i'o, that you are clear in your thoughts. And they would say, oh, that guy, he get plenty mana.
What they mean is that's the guy with the good ideas. Go see him. He knows how to solve your problem, right? This guy he has a lot of power. They're not talking about lifting up jeeps, right? They're talking about people that have manna, that are able to see their way clearly through a problem. And I think we do have to redefine our role, you know what I mean, and trying to explain how we should be passing on the legacy work of belonging to a culture that from its onset has been trying to be inclusive of the next person who washed up on shore. Right, I'm pretty sure all of us got to these islands the same way. We crossed the great big sea and we were like, damn, thought we were gonna die out here, you know what I mean? And washed up on the shore, half starving. And if you were lucky, there was some guy standing here with a papaya going, what's up? You okay? Bye, yeah. You know what I mean? This is why Hawaii is so different from the other Pacific islands, you know, as we know. In Hawaii, it's always been a little more lenient around the protocol, a little more ready to accept the stranger. You know what I mean? And because it's harder to get to, the distance is further. We know, hey, the trip should have killed you. Right? The fact that you rolled up on the shore means, must mean you were meant to be here, because damn, that was a long trip.
Yeah.
You share a lot of things with the coconut.
Yeah, with the coconut drifting across the sea, you mean, and clinging to any rock we can land on?
Yeah.
Well, you know, they refer to the niu as the tree of life. Ain't that right, Ramsey?
That's right. It provides everything you need.
Everything you need. The shelter, right? The food, the water. Oh, the water.
Yeah.
And the niu aikane, right? I remember when the wife and I pulled into this neighborhood and I saw the niu aikane trees, 2 of them in the backyard. This is some 16 years ago or whatever. You know what I mean? I saw the trees. I was like, okay, that's our house, right? And the real estate agent, but you haven't gotten out of the car yet. And I was like, I don't care. Right. I saw those trees. Somebody on this property at 900 feet on the Big Island, smart enough to plant niu aikane trees in the yard. I was like, okay, this is my place. I can stay right here watching the Hawaii Lona, listening to the kino lau. You know what I mean? This is how we were trained, right? And I've heard the platitudes, but I rarely see them listening to the training. You know what I mean? When we're talking about kino lau and the message forms and the plant forms and the body forms of our deities expressing themselves, it's a way of relating the idea of relationship, right? It's a way of talking about the human's relationship with the natural world. And so when I say, yeah, I'm responding to that elemental deity, that's code for, hey, I'm watching the plant world and seeing if there's any information through the cilia being directed in my direction. Since I'm part of the plant world and the animal world, I should be able to receive those signals too. Just like the pigeon pea tree right next to me. Except I've been given the gift of being able to walk around with my roots and branches. And this little friend of mine here has not, right? So there are many ways to describe the experience, scientific or, literary. But in either case, the tree was still signaling to me that this is where I wanted to be. And 15 years later, I'm so grateful and happy to be here. I'm so grateful to those trees. I talk to them every morning.
Yeah, we will spread our pollen somehow.
Is that why we need the bees?
It's all in the same canoe.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? It's either the bees or the stamen. I can't figure out which one is the important thing.
Yeah.
The rubbing or the rubbing. On a Sunday morning, who really cares, right? As long as the family's all together and we're all experiencing, one more sunrise.
That's right.
I was looking at myself in the mirror and I'm thinking about you. And I remember you in the 8th grade, and I remember me standing there with that camera looking at you going, "What's up, bro?" And it was like, that was hilarious. And look at us
Man, that
now.
was a long time.
Bro, we're a little bit gray in the hair.
Yeah.
A little bit gray in the beard.
I like to think we earned all of it, right?
Bro, I'm telling you, I don't think people understand that whole walking up through the 70s and 80s. I'm surprised we're still alive. We got friends ain't alive no more.
This is true. Very true.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. My father only lived 8 years longer than I am now. I mean, when you start thinking about it, it's like, encroaching in on that 10-yard line. They call it the red zone for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Ain't that right, Jimmy?
That's right. I can only hope that my lack of smoking and better diet will extend me beyond my father's years.
Yeah, I'm with you. You've been like my dad. You've been in and out of that hospital lately, even for the old poo fight.
Yeah. Well, I was born with a ventricular septal defect, which is a hole between the ventricles. So your heart doesn't beat. It sounds more like a washing machine because it doesn't slam hard against the valve. But one of the byproducts of that is often later in life, the mitral valve prolapses and it doesn't pump.
Right.
The heart isn't a very efficient pump anyway. It's a miraculous miracle in terms of keeping us alive and being a bioelectric machine, but it's not very efficient. So when you lose any measure of efficiency, then your ability to function in a way you're used to function goes away. So no, I've had 3 open heart surgeries in my life. And all I can say is, at least Western medicine is good at, the body work. Body and paint work we're good at. we can't adjust the carburetor very well, but we can do body and paint work.
Yeah, man, they're great in a car accident. I always say that, right? It's like in the trauma when you gotta pull out the fender and, hey, Bali, good to see you back. When you gotta pull out the fender and you gotta yank everything around. That's what the Western medicine is good for. And we're seeing that right in this moment, right? Western medicine is reacting every way it can, right? To pulling out the fender, to doing what they can straight. But then there's a lack of that other perspective, right?
Yeah, and the whole thing. We don't have that whole thing perspective.
Yeah, I'm glad Pali came back to join us. I mean, because specifically, I love watching the health of the economy as we're watching the health of society. We've all been working with the triple bottom lie for the last 20 years, right? With the silent N. We all know that society is really a way of saying labor and, environment is a way of saying resource. So, everything was, it's the economy, stupid, thanks to great presidential leadership. So anyway, as we're trying to recover now, we see a real dynamic tension between will the marketplace be supported by the buying public when there's no economic thrust, right? And can the rich continue this game of false inflation that keeps us slaves punching in the morning, and going to work when everybody's sitting at home going, wait a minute, I haven't been to work for 42 days and the world didn't stop. My kids still have to be fed. It's like, apparently the wife still wants me to report what I did all day. Whether I went to the office or sat in the garage doesn't matter, right? It's like when we start to see real life intruding in on the false narrative that the dominant modernity forces on all of us. This is going to lead to an interesting build back. I don't think it's like a normalcy. I don't think it's a return to business as usual. if it is,
Right.
I really feel sorry for the human race. We apparently are able to voluntarily shut our eyes and plug our ears and keep chugging. So what's your take on that, Paulie? How are we going to recover in a sensible way that puts women, children, community, parity, and justice first? Or is that a pipe dream? And am I dreaming when I look backwards?
It seems to me it's a pipe dream for those who have very limited experience in growing up in social, cultural, and environmental circumstances where they have lived an alternative. I would call them, some of my cousins, urban, what do you call urban natives or polyester Polynesians. So these are my relatives who I love dearly, but they have no idea because, ignorance is ignorance. You can't know what you don't know. And then you can't blame people for not knowing any better if that's all they know. The most important gift, I think, being raised among a living culture that has survived for several millenniums is that one component that I find very much absent in business literature, leadership, all the other factors associated with capitalism, etc., is spiritualism. That's a fundamental part of reality in our world. And what I find most troubling is growing up in the island and having a scholarship to go to university in the United States was, I thought, a wonderful opportunity. However, I don't know if I was led, as I was exposed to the fact that the machine narrative, the story, the mechanistic story, the machine metaphor was what basically fed my mind, because they wanted to create a rational mind that was considered with the rational model of a machine. And then once I got involved in the 16th and 17th century literature, I understood the genesis. Again, I'm not judging it. It's just this is what I was taught. And it wasn't until graduate school and an opportunity to go home shortly after my elders passed on, that I realized that their story of a living mother was being replaced by a mechanistic father.
Absolutely.
And so when it's that realization that I then really launched myself in understanding, not condemning or criticizing. That's not productive. This rational mind. And I also became even more dedicated to the spiritual mind of my world. So it's the organic world and the mechanistic world. And somewhere in between, I'm sure, is the pathway towards bigger and better things. So I think what we need to do is bring our living mother back onto the platform has now been dominated by our mechanistic father. And then between the two, we can find the means through which, because this is where I became to understand the importance of the weave between traditional wisdom and values with modern science, knowledge, and technology. It's taking the best of both, creating a third option with value added. You can't do it one or with the other. It's not an either or. I think it's a synthesis. It's a weaving, and I think that's fundamentally the story of change and how we have evolved into or towards becoming better children of the earth. And better brothers and sisters to each other.
It's so true. And we want to welcome Brother Hank Ferguson, who dropped in there. Hank, we can see you. You're broadcasting out live. So Just letting you know your mic's up there. Ramsey, Jimmy, Doc with you this morning. Good to see you there, brother. And again, I want to unapologetically say this is a meeting of a bunch of swinging dicks, old swinging dicks at that, on a Sunday morning. Talk about God and life and food and family and all the things. Yeah, sea monkeys at best. Hank, say something to everybody this morning.
Good morning. I can't tell if I can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
We can hear you.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. Good morning. Hey, Randy.
What's up, brother? Long time.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, brother.
I wasn't quite prepared for this. I'm setting up this whole area, and then I got your message last night. Do I want to join? I go, oh, let's see. So we're doing some mass running around here.
Yeah. I see you way up there.
Guess what? Got married yesterday.
Yay!
Yo.
Yay!
My wife and I have been married for 20 years, but
yay!
we went and redid it.
Good for you.
Where's the bride?
Jenny, she probably left him already. She left him already.
Oh, she's already left.
Okay.
Now that I legally
Quick learner.
See, so it turns out that love can still find you at 110. They're going to track you down, hunt you down in the forest like some wild animal. You know what I mean? And you find yourself in. Young fellas, let that be a lesson to you. If I was you, I would start treating that woman right now. Wouldn't you agree, fellas?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you. Took me 50 years to learn 2 words. That's yes, dear.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
my life is so much better now.
Well, it's really a nice little microcosm of what's sort of out of balance. What Doc was talking about with our society is, we have to elevate the feminine back to her rightful place in order to balance our lives and in order to balance the world. And, ever since the St. James Bible Committee met and destroyed any remnants of what Jesus might have done, made women the blame for everything. It's been out of balance, You can't do that. It's like, okay, we're in a lifeboat. Let's get rid of all the women. Who the hell does that?
Because they can't row. They can't row.
Yeah, they can't row or something. Yeah, who knows? It's just crazy. That's how dangerous the male ego is, okay? You really have to get a bridle and reins on that male ego.
Really?
Got to go back to where it used to be, right? With a matriarch.
I think you just have to, and maybe the best way to control that male ego is to accept women as equals, at least as equals.
At least, yes.
Well, I'm the boss because my wife said so.
yeah, there you go.
I think Paulie knows that one. That's the famous one in his household. I mean, I always stop in and check in with Linda. Anybody who's smart would do that.
Right.
Well,
no, but Paulie,
go ahead.
No. I think what you're saying earlier is so true. We were talking about listening earlier, yeah, Kalani?
Yep.
And just the Inoa, the names and what we call it. There's a reason for that. Okay. Kuli'o'o is here, which is Neo Valley right next door, and I'm sitting on the Ku'opa. Right. This was Momona. This was fat.
Aiki.
Yeah. This is where all the food was.
Ew.
Right? But that was Aina. Right. When we moved from Gaia to Saul, that's when things began to shift. Right? To your point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we call the place Port Lock and Cocoa Head now, huh?
Yeah. Well, that's why it's the subdivision of Hawaii Kai in the place called Mauna Lua.
Hey.
Yeah.
Which is, like I said, the Okole of Waimanalo, right?
Aye.
So we cannot get too Ho'okano over here, right? Otherwise, out with the wave. But I think it's absolutely true what you're saying, Paulie. This notion of spiritual intelligence versus this other thing. And yet we have the opportunity of blending because for us, Yeah. I, the food, AI. Today, AI is artificial intelligence. And so there's our, right? So AI, artificial intelligence needs to supported by natural intelligence and spiritual intelligence. Yeah. But to your point, there's more ignorance, which has lend itself to arrogance.
Yeah.
Which you don't often tend to blend well. So natural intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and artificial intelligence.
Instead of
at
the
some point, we all
arrogant
got to eat it.
id. You know,
Exactly.
this
area.
is,
Yeah, that's good.
Aid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
I want to add to that too. I first encountered this when I was in Kansas, my freshman year, and that's the notion. To me, it's at that time I thought maybe that's not true, but it's very much a misguided notion that women must be subservient to the man in all things. Women suffer in silence, beaten in silence, abused in silence, and many times they die in silence. But that's a cultural orientation. Not all cultures have that.
right.
They don't believe in that. Yeah. I don't know where that came from, but let me give you an example of ancient traditional belief systems that fortunately still survive. They should return back to dominance. But in Samoa, it's called a whiangainga. Whiangainga means covenant. And the whiangainga, that whiangainga is so sacred in our culture, but it's the covenant between the man and the woman. And it is our ancient beliefs that the woman as the childbearer shares divinity with the gods. And, by virtue of that, they are linked in everything that deals with growth, with nurturing, with not sustainability, but regeneration. See, they're very different. So from that core belief that I come with, I run into a different story. And I'm grateful for the story because now I understand why people think the way they do, but it depends on how they were raised and what culture they represent. But that's not all humanity. We don't think that way. I almost started to until my wife hit me over the head with a 2x4. What she did, she nearly suffocated me with aloha. So, it's amazing. That's more powerful, actually.
That's old growth forest, I'm sure.
That 2x4 is love, and we all know that, right? That big old stick is love when you realize that you are in fact loved, right? Yeah. The rest of it goes away.
So this presumption that we all males are pigs and et cetera, that I think that needs to be localized or culturalized, but not universalized.
Yeah.
There are a lot of cultures and belief systems that understand the root basis of all life is in a Mother Earth, not a Father Earth. A Mother Earth, and then we all derive all of our energies, all our revitalizations, all of our life materials from this relationship. Our Father are the stars, they're sort of removed, but they're out there. But anyway, I think these stories need to be brought back because they've been pushed back, and in some cases, repressed to the point where they become extinct. And look at the young children that are being raised to think that way. We need to correct that. We can't do it for the world or for the nation, but we can at least try to restore it in greater strength within our own communities and cultures, and then expand it out.
Yeah.
Well, we've seen it manifest, to your point, the mechanistic father, right? Which we tend to be operating in a monetized world.
Yes.
Whereas our organic mother is operating in the monetized world, right?
Well said.
Monetization versus monetization.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Now we've got to find a combination between those two, the monetization and the monetization. Yeah. You
Yeah.
cannot put it all on one side.
Right.
And to your point, we've kind of been very enamored by the monetization.
Yeah.
You know,
It's the
yet the
approach.
monetization.
You know, the way we approach the relational aspect of it, the monetization versus the monetization is about transactional versus relational, right? In the one aspect, we look and we think fundamentally from the mother's perspective, children must be fed. We must nurture life. We must move it forward. From the perspective of modernity, children must be exploited by the market share to get their parents to indulge them in wants and desires. So let's advertise directly to the children and get them to force the parents to spend their, their frivolous dollars on this thing that we've planned obsolescence in so we can increase our profit margin over an extended 10-year period. I want to do projections that show our market share growth so I can borrow more money at the onset and then I'll bankrupt in the third year and it doesn't matter anyway because I'll take all the assets and offshore them and disappear and see everybody soon as we go public. So in fact, the systems are really not just convoluted, they're skewed to the uber rich to continue to victimize the marketplace. And that, my friends, is tradition. We've been doing that for the last 3,000 years. So, in fact, how will we take this moment, as Ramsey was suggesting, to change the way that we behave towards the largesse, towards the economic recovery?
Yeah. Do you hoard the toilet paper or do you share it with your neighbors?
Good question.
Well, I mean, just think about that, right? I mean, as silly as it sounds, the symptoms supposedly of COVID were a temperature, a cough, a congestion, or something. And yet we went out and bought toilet paper. We didn't overrun Tylenol. We didn't overall, any of the cough medicines. We went after the toilet paper. So what end of the anatomy is running the thought process, right? You got to think about it. And if we extend that to our leaders, well, that explains it, right? We now know what end is making the decisions for us.
Are you suggesting they're wearing ass hats?
Well, there are assets and then there are, those that operate.
Oh, I thought you said ass hat. I thought we were just talking about coverings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, which is another thing. I mean, so now COVID has simply manifested the masks that we've all been wearing. And now we're wearing them on the outside instead of on the inside.
Yeah.
And it's forcing us. Yeah, and I think that this is where aloha comes back in, right? Because when someone has a mask on, you have to listen and you have to see differently and you have to feel differently. Because as Pali said, the rational lies that we've lived in the rational world, we can no longer feign with our smile, just with a smile, right? But now we've got a mask on, and now everyone's just manifesting the masks that have always been there.
We all get to be ha'ole.
We
all get to be ha'ole. Right now, we all know what it means when we ha'ole and we don't share the breath and we all stand apart. Right? It's like now they get it. I think it's interesting that me and Jimmy were talking about this, that the white people were so myopic that they thought it meant white people. Yeah, that's how full of themselves they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was posting online about white privilege, which has been investigated. And I think that's the thing that you were hinting at, especially Pali, around the dynamics of gender, right? Is that because of the culture of modernity, white men don't actually know that they have a culture. They think that the way they feel about the world is normal. It's perfectly normal. What are you talking about? I'm a rational human being who uses a logic model, who doesn't let his feelings influence his decision making. He's a rugged individual, pulls himself up by the bootstraps, doesn't need anybody. I'll take care of it myself. No thanks. I'll get the ulcer and cancer alone. You know, it's like this whole sort of pretend I don't have a culture. That is their culture. So they pretend that racism is everybody else's problem. That they don't have race. I have black friends. What are you talking about? I'm not a racist. It's like, yeah, except your black friends had to kind of tremble every time the popo pulled up. And you didn't. The police did not scare you the way they scared your black friends, right? It's like you didn't get chastised the way your black friends did. So in fact, you've had entitlement. You've had it whether you thought it or not. Now, saying this, I want to clearly say, not your fault that you don't know you have a culture, right? You were raised in a dominant culture that told you you were the good guy. So you didn't know oppressing your wife in the kitchen was a bad move, but it is. So we forgive you. You know, Sunday morning and all that. We're having coffee. We're being spiritual. We forgive you. And so knock it off. It's like, get back in line. Now that you've been spending the last 47 days at home, I think you figured out the wife and the kids, they got a place in this whole equation too. It's not just about you going back and forth between the boss and work and traffic and paying the bills. We all have bills to pay, and none of us are getting them paid right now. So relax. Like I said, I've been seeing a jump in domestic violence. So maybe the straight addressing the aggression that men are exhibiting close quarters in their family is something we need to do. So
we do need to do that.
My grandfather said, make sure the children are fed, make sure the old people are comfortable, make sure the women are unafraid. This is the job of the Kane. Doesn't matter how you swing your little schlong, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter how you contribute, but contribute and do it positively for the children, the elderly and the disabled, and the women in your society. This is very easy how to govern, how to do governance.
But you're speaking to the values again, though, Kalani, right? I mean, what are the metrics of success? And if you're operating off of a set of metrics that are already skewed
there you go.
to a preferred condition, right?
The 401.
So whatever it is. So when we make this so-called correction, and in many ways, this is a correction. Right? The real question is, what do you correct back to? What's the standard? Right? So if I'm going to use an old standard and go back to that and say that I'm now correct, we end up back on the same azimuth that we came in on, right? Which means we're going to end up in the same place. So I would ask Paulie, because I've witnessed it and I've seen it and it touched me. But the difference of, Paulie, you can explain this, the idea of correcting the behavior but loving the child. Can you speak to that? I think that's an important concept, because if we're not careful, right, we won't correct the behavior, right? We're just going to put the children in a different position. Right, exactly. I got to speak to that, Paulie. I think that's important, about the role of kupuna, the role of those that can see, that have the ability. Yeah, the notion of correcting, loving the child, but correcting the behavior.
I think a lot of it, I don't know if I can address it. I think we got to go back to the traditional wisdoms, to the ancient stories. For example, I learned that we call it tofa. Tofa means wisdom. And the way it's defined, or was defined, the way I understood it, the ability to discern the rhythms, the patterns, and the currents of mana, and then to conform to it. the belief in dealing with children is that ability to discern does not occur until a certain age. And so that's why when you go to large villages and you have very noble and esteemed ali'i sitting there and their orators and the pageantry, a little 4 or 5 year old can run around and crap on the mat and nobody will have any problems with that because they have not yet achieved that point where they can, because the behavior has not evolved yet. And so the child is not punished because there's no relevance in our world, because the child does not know better. It's until after probably around 6 or 7 that then the behavior is then taught. But meantime, the behaviors have been modeled by all of in the entire village. And it's at that time that the understanding is this is now where we can start to cultivate those seeds of observation of the child so to make sense of it. And that's separate from punishing the behavior. They're two very, very different things. And so the raising the child is understanding when is it time to cultivate. There's a time for planting. And basically it gets back to biomimicry. By observing how nature nurtures itself and regenerates itself and enables itself to thrive, we have basically adopted it in our human context and then applied it in our lives from the child to the adult, from life to death. I don't know, that's sort of how I see this, that separation. And to my surprise, delightful surprise, Linda her background is in special education and dealing with children with special needs and special challenges. In their literature, by many of their esteemed academic researchers and practitioners, they have come to the same conclusion, that you don't punish, that the behavior and the child are two different things. And that punishment may actually cause those two to become seamless. And once that happens, you're going to have a problem of long-standing for that poor child, as the child cannot separate it. And so all these other behavioral issues, emotional issues take root and grow.
Yes. Yes.
We lost your sound,
Sorry,
Kalani.
I was saying these behavioral aspects were investigated in the 70s, 80s, where we look at the difference between what they call negative and positive reinforcement of behavior versus interrupted reinforcement, then non-streaming, non-sequitur reinforcement, right? In fact, finally getting to the position, even in the U.S. military, when we're working with other life forms, other species, in concert to perform a mission, we found out you can't reward reinforce. You have to have a deep, abiding relationship with the animal, like in a canine service or, the dolphin services or any of the combat animal services. The animal has to want to do it for you. You have to have that deep, abiding relationship, or it simply doesn't work. Now, why wouldn't that be true of human employment of vocation, right? Why wouldn't, since we know that about the animal world, undisputed in the science world, why wouldn't labor laws be constructed so that humans were treated with that same decency when they became your employee or you were the employer? You could, in fact, expect that kind of decent relationship.
Well, because the workers should be happy just to have a bowl of gruel at the end of a day of breaking rocks. That's why.
I'm afraid you're right about that.
and there's thousands more where they came from. And since we got the guys with all the muscles and arms to back up our ridiculous ideas, that's the way we're going.
I love that. I love the idea that individual achievement and individual excellence has to be reinforced with an army of 10,000. It's like you can't individually, leverage that perspective. You don't show up with the army at the gate, you don't get to be the king.
And I think the important thing to remember
Right.
about education and cultural learning is that, and regardless of what race, I mean, let's face it, we're all human. That's the race, okay? We're all humans stuck on this planet at different levels of social and intellectual evolution. But we have to remember, some of the best lessons are what not to do. And what a great freaking seminar we're getting on that right now.
That's right. Yeah. Because I think what Pali was talking about was that whole idea of, you remember that saying, Hank, you know the parents about the kids?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
You know how far the fruit is fallen from the tree, right? Sometimes. But if you think about it, if the decision makers of those employers or an employment world, if those decision makers have been influenced by growth, or the only thing that they've seen about growth of going up and down is an elevator, that's their world of going up and down, right? Yeah. Versus watching a plant, a fish, or something in the natural world.
Ew.
Then clearly their decision making, the criteria of decision making, is very limited. So to Pauli's, what's the alternative? How do you deal with natural issues and concerns when all of your criteria has been established inside a column called an elevator?
Ew.
Right? I mean, you don't look left or right, to your earlier point, Kalani.
Yes.
You look up and down.
Right.
Right.
It's not even the metric. It's the framework of the metric.
That's right. And my status is based on how far up or down I am.
Ew.
And not the width of my existence, right? Or even my depth, for that matter. In fact, the lower you go, right, the worse it is. When in reality, that's where the roots start. And so these connections have been lost. It's not even there anymore. We keep looking up at the top of the trees and ignoring the roots.
Ew.
And what Paulie is talking about is that here we've got to go back to the roots. What are we rooted in? So the question is, what fruit can we expect if the roots have already been separated? People are going to go back to continue the same thing. We got to shift. What is that?
Ew.
Right? And if they haven't seen that, or if they have not witnessed those things, then they're relying on the meanderings of their own minds, of the guy sitting next to them. Right? And so how do you correct the behavior or correct a child who is, it's the 70-year-old, the 7-year-old and the 70-year-old, right? The 6-year-old and the 60-year-old. And we've got leaders right now who are still adolescent in their thought process.
Oh, yes.
How do you correct the behavior when the 6-year-old and the 60-year-old is making adolescent decisions, right? When there should be an adult in the room. Right?
Oh.
And yet, I'm not sure we can trust the adults because they're all operating off the rational lies of the rational mind.
Ayo.
Right? That brought us here. So maybe we need to go back to the kids.
Yeah, we're looking for the great-great-grandmother at this point, right? We're looking for some other voice, more grounded, more suited.
Right. And I think she just spoke to us, right?
Yo.
And Paulie said, bring mother back on the platform.
Exactly.
Well, mother's coming home.
She
right?
just did.
I mean, the ocean is coming in, grandmother's coming home, right? You either make a room for her or build a wall. What is it going to be?
Yeah.
You know, and if anything, we see what's happening in nature right now. Mother is saying, step back, I'm back, and it's time for you to reboot, right? This is a culture reboot going on.
Right.
But what's the underlying algorithm? That's my question, right?
You know, my grandfather,
what's the underlying algorithm?
He would talk about how the cultural reboot was climate change. And this is when I was a young boy in the 60s, 66, 67. You know, we're sitting around the fire after Pauhana, eating the poo-poos, and evening is coming, and he would start to tell the stories, the way they do over the Ava Maikai. And he would talk about how our present dynamic between men and women, the gender war, is actually driven by climate change. How there was once a mass goddess culture around the globe, and everyone worshiped the goddess, and it was about the planting and the harvest, and how a young man would be chosen regionally everywhere to represent the god. And for a year, he would have all the sex with all the women and all the food, and they treated him like a living god. And a year later, they would sacrifice him, sow his body and blood into the ground, give him as the groom to the earth mother. After taking his seed from him to produce this godlike offspring throughout the tribe. And then apparently the climate begins changing, and the women did what all humans do. Since it wasn't working anymore, they just did more. So they started killing more and more men every year and sowing them into the ground to see if the earth mother would be satisfied. And that led to the great pushback by the young men who were being sacrificed. So the young men turn on the old men, turn on the women in society, blame them for all the ills, and we start getting mythic tales of Lilith and Eve and the evil of women and how they must be covered over. Don't let anything but their eyes be shown, because they'll tempt you into following their leadership. You know what? What? Driven by climate change. This is why my whole life, as Ramsey can attest, I've been in the environmental movement, watching the climate, watching the phenological changes, and saying that we must watch the world. There is a readjustment coming to our social order. And like before, it's preceded by climate change, right? So if we really want to get through this mix fast, let's reconstruct our social order now. What kind of world do we want to bring our children into? What kind of world do we want to live in? Let's not blindly stumble into the future. I'm a planner, and planners plan for planning's sake. You know what I mean? It's like we should plan and then throw all the plans to the wind and just go where our hearts take us.
Well, there's the noun and the verb, plan or plan.
Yes, exactly. I'm a verb
guy.
But
what I can attest to is that when you walk in the room, the climate does change.
Yeah. I think it's the cloud of smoke that I walk in. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, the climatologist. Right?
I think that by bringing Mother back onto the platform, she brings in that perspective that has, or that dimension more than the perspective, because it has existed forever, that has always been there. We need to not repeat a practice, as perhaps we need to expand it to include other dimensions. I think one of the things that she will bring, and the mindsets that come with it, and the mana and everything, is the understanding, because there's such an overwhelming, disproportionate belief and faith in the mechanistic scientific process. It does have tremendous validity, but that is not the end of it all. There are other aspects of it. And one of the most important lessons that we need to learn is that certainly we can heal our humanity with many of these technologies, but there are some things that we cannot cure with our science and our technology. And I think the most potent of this is probably the most difficult to quantify. It's aloha. It is so compelling. In our world, it moves me This is our world.
Yo.
When someone says aloha, my whole body resonates.
Yo. Yo.
You know, when somebody says prophet, I said, oh yeah, no big deal, you know. So, and we need to bring our stories of reaffirmation back. For example, they lead to ways in which we can reconnect or strengthen our embrace of aloha. One of them is ike. In the South Pacific, it's called ike. It's attunement. It's an intuitive ability to see and feel things that are not readily apparent to others. And for the longest time, I used to be almost embarrassed when I was in graduate school and we talked about in areas in physics, and then I mentioned it and everybody laughed. But they're not laughing now.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the most compelling quotes that I've committed to heart, because it reaffirmed and reassured me that I was not espousing some simplistic pagan perspective on how things were created, was by the very father quantitative thinking and physics himself. And when I was first exposed to that, by the way, by a physics professor, he called me aside and he said, "Why don't you take a look at that?" And it was a quote that he said, "This is by Albert Einstein." I said, "Really?" And I was wondering, well, what's this have to do with anything? Until I read it. And the quote is, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift. The rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society where we have honored the servant and forgotten the gift."
Ooh,
I have never forgotten.
That was very strong.
Yeah.
Bring our sacred gifts back with our mother, place it on the platform. And we need to stand by her, stand by it. We all possess a sacred gift. And then we need to understand that it's through these wisdoms that purely intelligent and pure intelligence and knowledge by themselves is not enough. That we need the guidance of intuition, because I recall my elder speaking to me, "You need to learn the language of the sacred gift." And I said, "The language of the sacred gift?" Yes. It's learning to trust your heart when it speaks to you.
Mm-hmm.
Our ancestors, your ancestors, they speak to your heart. Of course, until your hair starts to turn black like mine, that these wisdoms actually begin to soak in, to actually meaning, and to move you in ways that you finally realize what a totally ignorant idiot you've been for much of your life.
Mm.
So that now, yes, you need to trust your heart and create the resilient and equitable systems that can integrate the needs of our society with the integrity of our Mother Nature. So.
Yo. What finer point than that for us to say goodbye. Fellas, let's go around the clock and give you a chance to clear your table and tell everybody, starting with you, Hank. Really glad you joined us this morning.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm getting my stuff together, Steve. Of course, I have an audience over here.
Of course.
You know, I'm listening to this. I'm gaining so much from here. One of the things that I've actually been blessed with is my son was handicapped, and here I was thinking that I was all this, and then I have a child who didn't have cognitive ability, you know. And now what do you do with this? What do you do with it? What do you beat the child because he can't figure out what you're talking about, or do you have to look through his eyes? And it was a rude awakening, but it was such a blessing in my life.
Ew.
Because no matter what, I was looking at somebody who was totally dependent upon me. I was a single parent with a handicapped child, and I was still working, you know, and I'm getting messages from my doctor. The problem with him is he's not being disciplined correctly. And I'm going, wait a minute, I promised I would never do that because I was raised with that hard dad, you know, and then I had to change it back. And then we find out he has a seizure disorder. That was the problem. And it was like, man, talk about do some fast adjusting, you know, but it was such a blessing because with all my frailties, somehow or another, my son was just a wonderful kid. I mean, he was so polite, you know, it was like, I don't even know where he got it from. I don't think I have it, you know, it's like, but at the same time, apparently it must have been that way. You know, need is an amazing inspirational tool to help you understand and adjust because I don't count as much as that child does. You know, and if he cannot smile and feel free, even with his disabilities, then I failed, you know. But anyway, I'd love to be able to get into this conversation really deeply because it's we have a society of that's almost handicapped. And if we can understand that these are children, we need to look through the children's eyes. I think it was once said, I think in the Bible, it says someplace that unless you can be like them, can you enter the kingdom of God? And they're talking about the children that were playing in the mud puddles on the side of the road. People got to understand what that means to be able to see through that. Because even in a war zone, as soon as the bombs stop, the kids are up and playing. That's the bottom line. Anyway, love you folks.
Love you, Hank. You know, they say that play is secular spirituality. You want to see spirituality without any of the religious bullshit? Just watch some 3-year-olds playing at the sandbox. Brother Ramsey, I love you. Make this a Sunday habit if you can, man. You know we miss your thinking.
You got it, man. I love it,
man.
Yes.
Yeah. No, Hank, I think you put a topper on the stopper. You know, the idea that what Paulie said, our gifts. Sometimes it takes moments like this for those gifts to be realized and revealed to us. Yeah. They've been sitting there waiting for the opportunity. You know, this experience we have right now is revealing in each of us the gifts that many of us have hidden away for far too long. But it's going to take the we to move away from the me for us to come together. Yeah,
absolutely. You just turn that thing upside down, right?
The power of the we over the me. You know, it's like an equation. You know.
And they say, we.
Yeah, speaking of which, it's been over an hour. You guys probably got to go we. So we should be signing off. But never let it be said that we did not give the white man the last word. Jimmy Love, I want to let you know that you get to sign us off, baby. Let's make it a good one.
That's a dangerous idea. You know,
there's always next Sunday.
I'll say that one of the best lessons I ever got from our Native brothers and sisters was in a battle over the high school name, the Braves. The American Indians came to our school from all over the land, and I learned about white man's disease, which is that we tend to be proud of our ignorance. And that's something I want everybody to think about and try and switch, is because we don't know much. You know, even the most educated of us all, we have so much to learn.
Yeah, it's true. It's all true. We all have so much to learn. You know, and this is the truth of it. If we can all admit that every single one of us is stumbling along. Absolutely. Maybe then we'll drop the ego. We'll extend the hand, you know, and help everybody stumble, at least in the right direction. You know what I mean? One that keeps us fed, keeps us sheltered, clothed, you know, keeps the nexus of water, food, energy, medicine, and education close to the community. Close to the community. This is not an American ideal. This is a human idea that the family should survive well. And so, thank you, gentlemen, again. Thank you, thank you. You know, I always put articles on the side from the week demonstrating the racism of the COVID response, demonstrating the injustice of the system. There's no justice, there's just ice. They only want us to chill out, to cool everything down so that there's no big revolutionary problem. Well, whatever's going on, I appreciate the optimistic outlook that this conversation takes, and so there's no reason to bring that muck into it. We all know the muck is there. What do we do about it? And I think this idea that first we begin in relationship, first we talk about what we think we see and how that compares to where we just came from. So again, thank you, gentlemen. I'll be glad to see you next Sunday. Let's pick this up. Hopefully Daniel Wildcat will join us. And we'll keep posting these things on YouTube and on Facebook. And we want to thank everybody for joining us on Hindsite 2020. Just a real quick sign off, everybody.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha, mai.
Thanks for joining us all. We shall see you next week. And here's the outro.
Pray for the rain, for the early snow. Pray there's a God up in heaven, a fallen angel below. Pray for the road less traveled, unravel the things you know. Pray for the working class hero. Pray for the water, for the healing spring. Pray for the wind through the treetops when the forest sings. Pray for the crying babies, what a crying shame. Some of us will never pass this way again. Pray every step I take will one day lead me home. Pray the mistakes I made ain't set in stone. Pray for everyone I have ever known. Pray for me. Well, pray for hope, for the endless spring. Pray for an end to the violence and misery. And pray every runaway baby gotta get away, baby. Pray for the naughty pictures in my head. Pray for the passion, the poison, the blanket. Pray the mistakes I made, you'll set in stone. Pray for everyone I've ever known. Pray for me. Well, pray for you and me. Pray every living consciousnesses breathing free. Pray for the life around us, the mystery. Pray for all that we might be. Pray every step I take.